Hello everyone, it's Jabba. Today I'm going to be bringing y'all another educational Spiral Abyss video. Today we're going to be going over what is known as a HIKARI team. For people who are not familiar with team comps, or what they're actually called, you might be asking, what is a HIKARI team? A HIKARI team is focused on using the various cooldowns and resources within your team composition to essentially maximize the amount of damage your main on-field DPS deals, rather than relying on the combined effort of off-field supports as well as your DPS to do damage at the same time. Alrighty, the word for today is going to be simp. This will be the key to mastering your rotations within a HIKARI team composition. Simp stands for shred, impede, maximize, and finally, punish. Shred. Be aware of what artifacts your characters are using, as well as the individual buffs and or debuffs your support will be providing with their abilities. Start your rotation by shredding the resistance of whatever element your corresponding DPS is associated to. Impede. Restrict the enemy's movements. This can come in many different forms, such as staggering them, full-on stunning them in place, or grouping them up together. Maximize. This is where you essentially put all of your eggs in one basket. Use the cooldowns of your supports to fully amp up your on-field DPS and maximize their damage. Immediately swap to that on-field DPS following the usage of those cooldowns. The final and most satisfying step, punish. Swap to your on-field DPS character and do as much damage as possible within a short period of time. Watch yourself strike with high numbers and destroy your foes. Before we get into the actual gameplay to show these rotations, there are 3 things I need to mention. 1. HIKARI teams are not necessarily constellation dependent. For example, my limited banner 5-star characters are all Constellation 0. Another example is that my Kujo Sara is Constellation 4, but Constellation 6 is the real moneymaker. At C6, she boosts the crit damage of Electro characters by 60%. However, as you'll soon see in the gameplay, my Raiden Shogun is still able to hit 200k plus on her burst despite my Sara not being C6. 2. Sometimes the rotation will not be as cut and dry in terms of order. Depending on cooldown usage, this can change. Sometimes cooldown durations may even extend into the next rotation, and multiple steps can be achieved within close proximity to each other or at the same time. 3. The rare process still applies throughout every rotation. If you're new here and don't know what that means, that video will be linked in the description. I'd highly recommend pausing this video and watching that first before continuing. So I'm adding this to the script about 3 to 4 days after I kind of put that whole section together. I'm aware that Alhaitham is not part of a HIKARI team because he relies on Fischl and Nahida to basically proc spread for him as an elemental reaction. So technically he does rely on those off-field supports a little bit more. But the simp process still applies, as he's the one who carries and front loads all the damage to be able to clear the first half for each of the chambers. Alrighty, with all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into the gameplay here to go through the simp rotation step by step, explaining each gameplay decision during both halves of Floor 12 Chamber 1. Alright, so starting off right here, I'm basically performing 2 steps at once. I'm performing both Shred and Impede at the same time, a little bit out of order. I'm going to start off with Zhongli's Meteor here to be able to impede their movements and stun lock them in place. Following that, I'm going to throw up Zhongli's Shield, basically providing resistance shred to all forms of resistances at the same time. Next, and still part of the shred step, I'm going to be using Nahida's elemental skill to be able to shred the Dendro resistance of these enemies, being that she is currently running a 4-piece Deepwood Memories, providing that Dendro resistance shred. Alright, so we're going to move on to the maximize step here. I'm going to use Nahida's elemental burst to transfer elemental mastery to my on-field character. I'm going to pop Fischl's elemental skill, aka Oz, to be able to continue proccing that spread reaction through off-field electro application. And then finally, I'm going to use Alhaitham's elemental burst with no previous mirrors equipped or on field to be able to gain 3 chisel mirrors and be able to maximize his damage through the use of his elemental skill combined with his auto attacks, continuously proccing spread and having higher damage numbers due to the elemental mastery transfer. And now we're moving on to the punish step here. We basically just keep auto-attacking using Alhaitham's N3 attack pattern within the rotation to continuously proc those mirrors, using charge attacks and the elemental skill to basically provide that final mirror multiple times throughout this rotation. Alright, so we're going to move on to our second set of enemies here for this half, the Consecrated Beasts. Rotation is going to remain largely the same, except we're going to use Nahida first to be able to have her elemental burst up a little bit earlier for that elemental mastery transfer, and to be able to group them up near this wall, while Zhongli uses his meteor to be able to stun them, hold them in place, and have better grouping for Alhaitham once he wants to do all his damage. Alright, so moving on to the second half here, we're going to start with Shred. We're going to use Raiden's elemental skill, and then use Kazuha's elemental burst to be able to shred that electro resistance because he has 4-piece Viridescent Venerer. We're then going to impede these fungi by using Kazuha's to be able to just basically get him in a large group. So we're going to move into the maximize step here by popping Vanet's elemental burst, and then we're going to pop Kujosara's burst to get a little bit of nuke damage on field whilst being buffed by Bennett, and swapping into Raiden Shogun in the middle of Kujosara's burst animation to make sure that Raiden Shogun also gets that buff. Kazuha is going to provide that elemental damage bonus by swirling Electro within his burst. And finally, we're going to head into the punish step with Raiden Shogun, just basically do as much damage as possible within her elemental burst, and she should be able to provide the energy needed for all the other characters within the party to be able to get their burst back on time.
Come on, enough procrastinating. Let's go.
For these next set of enemies, rotation is going to remain largely the same, albeit with a little bit of mistiming due to a couple of errors on my part in terms of funneling energy, but it's completely fine. The job still gets done. Moving on to the Consecrated Beasts here, it gets a little bit tricky due to their movement, so I'm going to basically use Kazuha within Bennett just to be able to keep him alive and funnel energy to the rest of the team, and then we're just going to use Raiden Shogun again. Rotation is just going to remain the same pretty much like this throughout. If I have the chance to swirl Electro, I'll swirl it, but if Kazuha needs to survive, I'm just going to use it within Bennett's burst and swirl Pyro.
The sun is out. Shall we take a stroll?
Alright, there was the gameplay for the Hypercarry teams, showing the simp rotation process on both halves, with me talking about what's going on a little bit more in depth compared to the last guide video. Keep in mind that my teams all have medium to high investment, and Hypercarry teams do require that. However, I can assure you that it is well worth it. If you enjoyed the educational part of the video, go ahead and hit the like button, leave any feedback or questions in the comment section below, and subscribe for more content just like this in the future. One little challenge I have for you before we continue is to try to identify steps of the simp process throughout each rotation. Alright, let's head into floor 12 and see how these teams hold up.
Let's go.
ちにいらっしゃい。
天道万象難攻不落
姿を見せ。
三段いやていや強戦
これこそが知恵の伝道。
天理チョーク剣女盤石
断罪の名に。
理論の演劇雲の行くごと風の思いみんなは俺が待つ
天なる来光稲光すなわち永遠なりたそこたてやたたて裁きのいもみちばを散らまく惜しみ風を知れはっふっ燃えろ全力攻撃だよっイカズチに無我の境地逃げ道はあり
みんなは俺が守れ
雲が借りなくていいはっ前千なる来光ここより弱滅の時ふんたっストップヒュッたった裁きの雷もみちば散らまく惜しみ風の赴くままに
みんながそばにいてくれるわ傷なんて痛まない燃えろ
浄土を解放さし無我の境地やっふっふっふっ
難攻不落
痛くしちゃう。断罪の名に。覚えたわよ。これこそが知恵ので。
剣女盤石
夜の権限。
三段天道ここにある難攻不落
痛くしちゃうかも。知識を姿を見せよ。
理論の演劇いやはっはっ強戦てっはっとてっいやはっ
裁きのい
冒険だ冒険全力攻撃
風の行く先を雲なく借りなく時風を知れ来戦ここより弱熱の時ふっ見切りました風の行く先を風の歌雲の行くごと風
みんなは俺が
無我の境地高よ砂塵を起こせ裁きの怒りもみちばを散らま逃げられると思うな
燃えろ全力攻撃
千なる来光逃げ道はありませんこの愚かはっそれはっここより弱滅の時必ず戻ってくると裁きの雷雲が借りなく時
くらい
覚えたわよ。断罪 の名に
強戦
私のお家にいらっ
岩山八九
夜の剣
運行天理チョーク剣女万丈
はびこりなさい。覚えたわよ。これこそが知恵の弁。姿を見せ
理論の演劇もらったここか
見切りました。
雲が仮燃えろ全力こ
浄土を開放さし無我の境地やっ愚か
前そこだもみちろ散らまくみんなは俺が守れ
イカズチに捧ぐここより弱滅の時そこやっ
雲が借りなく時風よみんながそばにいてくれるわ絆
浄土を開放さし無我の境地へふったせい裁きのイカズチ
もみちろ散らまくせい全力攻撃やせいそれ行こう
イカズチに稲光すなわち永遠なり